Stumble forward, stumble forward. The 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 stumble.
I'd like to welcome Alan Neal to the Stumble Forward. Alan is a Carleton University journalism graduate, gifted and well-loved journalist and on-air host for CBC Radio Ottawa, playwright and children's author. He was the longtime host of Ontario Today and now helms the hugely popular Ottawa Drive Home show All in a Day, whose listenership reaches from Western Quebec through Eastern Ontario. I've been interviewed by Alan several times, and I can say that they're always the most interesting and well-researched interviews I get to do. Today, I hope to do even half as good a job interviewing Alan as he does me. Welcome, Alan Neal.
Thank you very much, Hawksley Workman. Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
It's exciting for me because I've outed myself several times to you about the fact that I am a CBC fanatic and was particularly fanatical in those years where I heard you every day on Ontario Today and, was starstruck in some ways to meet you and be able to interact with you. That's Canadian showbiz right there.
Yeah, that's it. When you're starstruck by the show with the gardening phone in, you're in Canada. Yeah, that's right.
Well, and I definitely want to talk about the gardening phone in because to me, this is elemental. But
yeah,
it'd be good to go back to your early days. And I was actually quite surprised how there's no wiki on you, or at least the wiki is closed. It's hard to get a real sense of the early Alan Neal, but I was really lucky to stumble on an interview you did with Krista Delaney in 1998.
Oh my goodness. This is what this feels like. Oh no. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
This is what you do to me. And I'm trying to, as I said earlier, I'm trying to do half as good a job with you as you do.
All right.
So this is very interesting to me because, look, I know keeners because I'm a keener, and I feel like there's a reason why I sniffed you out in that way. Because this opening paragraph here says it all to me. It really tells the story of the kind of human we're dealing with when it comes to Alan Neal. So here it is. First, this is the first paragraph in this story written released October 3rd, 1998. Alan Neal didn't have a job when he graduated from Carleton University 3 years ago. Armed with a journalism degree, Neal went to CBC Radio in Ottawa and offered to work for free for 1 week. He threw himself into each task, and when the week was over, the producers asked him to stay. So, like when you were a kid, were you a CBC fan? Did you have your sights set on this job from day one, or how'd that go?
No, I mean, and no offense to Krista Delaney, but it didn't quite occur exactly like that. But just to correct the record there, I had gone through my final year of journalism at Carleton and realized that I had not done an internship and then I was actually at the CBC because I had written this. I was there being interviewed as a playwright, and at the end of the interview, the associate producer who was working on All in a Day, in fact, the very show that I host, said, "Hey, have you done an internship?" And I said, "No, I didn't apply. I didn't get around to it. I didn't do it." And they said, "Oh, well, do you want to do one here?" And I suddenly, like, this light went on, ding, ding, ding. What? Yes, I do. I do want to do that. And it was an amazing moment of, like, somebody stepping in at just the right time and offering, because I wasn't sure what I wanted. I definitely didn't think I was going to do radio because I did not enjoy my voice. I did not think of all the disciplines that we had done at Carleton, like print was where I thought I was a pretty good writer. I thought I could probably pursue that as being the goal. And also I think so much of the training at that point is about being a reporter versus what I actually discovered I quite liked was producing and associate producing and working behind the scenes. And so, again, that was like this extremely fortunate moment that occurred where somebody's, said, "Do you want to do this?" And indeed, at that point, internships were free. And so I figured I'd do it. I think it was actually 2 weeks that I said I'd do it. And then through no fault of my own, and I completely promised this, people kept falling sick on the show. And I kept having an opportunity to stay on. And then weirdly, with the way work went, I actually had the record for a while. I'm not sure if I still do, but for the longest time as a casual employee without actually having a job, because it would just keep, and as was the reality for many people in those days, they would. And I remember somebody saying to me at one point, "You may never have a job at CBC, but as far as we're concerned, you will always have work." And at the time, that was good. That was, for me, that was like, yeah, that's that. I like that freedom. I like that idea. But in terms of your original question, the now I know what this, I know it's like what's going through your brain right now. Is he ever going to answer my original
No,
question?
I'm loving this. I'm loving this.
The love of the CBC, like in our house, yeah, it was nothing else on. Like I mean, to the point where when you become a teenager and you're like, "Can we please just see what's going on Top 40 Radio?" But in general, like that was it. It was like, Zosky and Gabbro and all those voices were the ones, and all the local voices that I grew up with. So that, to me, that was the sound of how you found stuff out. And so that was always, so it was fascinating at the point being a guest at that, like I'd been on several times as a guest on CBC and seeing, this is how the inner workings happen. And then being allowed into that and being allowed to really work on the crafting of shows, like that was, it was kind of a dream that I'd had without realizing I had the dream, I guess is a good way of putting it.
Well, that's interesting because, for deeper into this interview, and I'm going to read another segment here, it's revealed that I'm guessing your first true love is theater, and that maybe the CBC thing was kind of gurgling away in the background, but we are introduced to a 6-year-old Alan Neal in this paragraph here. When I was 6, my mom was studying classics at Carleton, and she was bringing home plays like Sophocles' Antigone and Shakespeare. She'd explain how they worked, and I acted them out with my toys. So you'd have Antigone starring Miss Piggy and Ben Kenobi. And even though I didn't know what I was talking about at that age, I liked the idea of putting on a play. So what's revealed here is a young theater nerd who's, is just budding. Like we are about to see you flower. I get the sense you wrote 7 plays between 1992 and 1998. There was a whole life of Alan Neal pursuing a life in theater before this whole CBC thing. When I was thinking about it this morning, in some ways, a journalism degree plus a love of theater equals the perfect blend of aptitudes to bring to what is essentially a performance job in journalism. Am I right?
Yeah, in some sense, like the thing that I remember sitting down once for a job interview. This is, again, wow, this is bringing back a lot of weird memories for me. But I remember sitting down for a job at the Citizen, local paper, and the editor at that time took a look at my CV and said, "I don't quite get it." She said, "Because you're doing journalism." It was actually a journalism and law double degree. And she's like, "You've got journalism, you've got law, you spend all this time in theater." And she said, "You seem to like all this stuff, but it doesn't go together." And I launched into this speech at the time that I remember walking out of there going, okay, I could if I needed to suddenly do a monologue on a spot, I could do it. But it was about storytelling. And I remember I said, like, I think all of those things like represent a need for somebody's story to be told. And there are voices that you don't get to hear, and voices that you want to hear, and voices that you want to understand better. And if whether you're telling those stories in journalism, or you are crafting those stories on stage, or you are trying to understand the legal perspective, like what somebody is how somebody is affected by the law, you have to understand what's going on in their mind, and you have to be able to bring that to the surface. You don't get, of course, in journalism to fabricate. That would be, a very different kind of show I would be doing. But the idea of listening and then trying to ensure that story gets told, I think has always been part of it, for sure. And I don't know that I ever really thought, I'm going to full-time be doing theater.
Right.
Part of that is just pragmatics. Like I was kind of a practical kid or something, like where I was I didn't actually do drama in school and high school as like a class. I didn't do it. It was just a real passion. I really enjoyed it,
Mhm.
but I didn't ever think that that was necessarily going to be the full-time thing. I started the theater company like that I did in summertime, and I did all that stuff because I wanted to just do stuff without needing to necessarily follow the pattern of everything else. But yeah, I did always find those things wove together more than people thought.
I mean, I don't come from an academic background, so for me, if I'm trying to create, these connections, it's from what I've sort of experienced personally. And to me, there could be no better combination. I mean, this is coming from a fan of yours and somebody who loves to be in the presence or to be witness to somebody who gets to do their job at a very high level. And that doesn't matter any job. Like I remember there was a guy who dug out my basement in my first house, and he used laser levels and was passionate about it. And I was absolutely interested and fascinated with what he did. Anybody who loves and is great at what they do, you love and are great at what you do. And so this to me, a quick off-road, I saw Cadence Weapon tweet about how, we'd just seen Tracy Chapman on the Grammys blow everybody's mind. And like what we should all be reminded about is that when somebody does something great, we all respond. And why does modernity not allow for more people to just be allowed to be great? What's amazing to me is you're one of those CBC people who has that, I don't know, it's emblematic of the CBC branding. There's enough kookiness, intelligence, artfulness, thoughtfulness, intellect. Like you have this, a culmination of all of the right tools to do this job at the high level that I think we all have come.
Wow, can you just follow me around all the time, Huxley, and say these things? Like this is what who gets all these things said about them? This is awesome.
Alan,
okay.
you know that you're well respected in the business, and you know that you do a great service to your city. I listened to yesterday's broadcast this morning, and here's one of the things that really, really hit me. Is that in that show yesterday? And where did I write this down? You had to navigate emotionally. You were our sort of emotional pilot navigator to go through segment stories on sexual assault, Valentine's Book Club, an Ottawa scientist trying to extend his funding for COVID research, another segment on looking for Indigenous language instructors for Ottawa School Board, and each segment, you're adjusting your tone and your sensitivities and the overall sort of like your overall approach to each thing requires a very different intellectual and emotional disposition. Are you in charge of that? Are you aware of that? Is this something you're honing over years? You must know that's what's happening.
I think in a way, I would hope we all do that to a certain extent. Like you are in one situation, you read the room, and you understand what needs to shift in order for that to happen, right? Like I'm sure as a musician, there are times where you have gone out and changed a set list as a result because you've realized this is not the room, or this is, this feels right. I know sometimes you cannot do an entire change set list on the spur of the moment, but where it's possible. Yep. And so I think, and hopefully, I mean, the people who cannot pick up on that, or who don't just stick with their same tone, and no matter what the story is, I think would probably have a harder time with each of those stories. So it is partially, you want to draw out the best in people, so you want them to feel comfortable. It doesn't. When I say that, I mean there are some interviews that are obviously, accountability, and comfortable is not the right word, but you want to ensure that they are being heard. You want to always be listening to what they're saying, and therefore by listening, hopefully your own tone or emotion changes as well. I think you can go overboard too, though. I mean, I have heard certainly the interviews where somebody is emoting themselves in a way that they're almost trying to get someone to feel the emotion they want them to feel. But that's that.
You're not doing that, and I don't feel like you ever did that because. And I know I know the type of interview you're talking about, that person who's looking to create a hyperbolic tension that results in something overly emotional that, results in clicks or whatever it is that, journalism writ large is chasing these days. It still feels like elementally or fundamentally, you're being driven by the same principles as a performer and journalist as you were 20 some odd years ago. I don't feel like your motivations are changing. And when I was listening to you shift an emotional, intellectual disposition today, and even it's interesting you bring up that you had there's law also in your academic history, because you even deftly navigated the story legally around the law, the legal case that was opening against in the sexual assault case with those hockey players. And you were able to definitely navigate that with a sense of how the law even worked. And I was quite impressed. Again, being a fan of yours, I don't get to hear you because I'm just outside of the CBC's reach now here in Peterborough. But I was reminded again what a powerful and thoughtful human you are. You as a CBC host, there's a lot of pressure because, I mean, reading the room, not everybody can read the room. And in fact, I'd say reading the room is not as easy a job as you sort of say it is. I think you're particularly good at it. I think you just assume that because you're good at it, that it must be just a skill that everybody has. We all know that a lot of people struggle with reading the room. And in your position as a CBC host, the CBC has turned into an environment where in many ways you are offering up the social brand of the instinct, like whatever the social instinct for Canadians is. Like you're under a lot of pressure to say and do and be the right thing at the right time. So and I feel too, if you step out of line in even a small way, I'm guessing you hear plenty about it.
No one ever complains. No one ever says anything negative. It's a remarkable world we live in. And also, if they do, they always take a lot of time and thought to think about it before firing up. Yeah, no. I mean, to be honest, I would say that a lot of when criticism comes in, it's a lot of the time extremely valid. There are things with the daily program. It is 3 hours of live radio that is coming out every day that you are helping to chase, helping to fill, finding the guests. There is an amazing tiny team that works on this show. So like I'm researching some of the scripts and writing some of the scripts, but others are writing others, and but the time constraint to find out everything about something before it goes to air is sometimes ludicrous. Like it's sometimes depending on how quickly something's developing. And I'm really happy sometimes for the days where we say, you know what, we don't have this yet. We're not going to air. We don't know enough. Like this would be uninformed to like go forward with this, even though you're hearing and you're watching as all these other places are sometimes firing off the bits that they know. Sometimes you're waiting a day, you get it better, like you actually do. But in terms of like the critique, sometimes it, like, you do say the wrong thing, you do say a question that if you thought about it again, you're like, oh, okay, I would have phrased that slightly differently. But also, I feel like the guests are often not put off by the same thing that a listener might be. Like, I think often a guest will get why you had to push something, whereas somebody else will say, like, oh, that you re-asked that too many times. Like, why did you have to badger that person or whatever? Or similarly, there's a point sometimes where you have to say, okay, I'm moving on because we only have 9 minutes. It's not like every show is not like The Current or Q where you get like 25 minutes to do some, not every interview is 25, but like you don't always have the time. And so sometimes you have to move on in order to get other things in there. And generally, if I go home every day, one of the things that I feel is that thing of like, I just would have liked to be able to ask X, Y, and Z. So if ever people are listening and they think, I wish he or she had said blah, probably the host is probably thinking the same thing. They're probably also thinking, I wish I had done that too. But I don't know, maybe they're not. But I know sometimes those are the regrets.
I mean, it's a 3-hour performance. Again, I'm a stage performer, and I know a thing or two about what the emotional cost of that is. Like, you are staying focused and wrapped in this 3 hours. You are having to maintain your wits, staying ahead of the language that you're using, because that language is being examined, like you said, with more acute attention today than it ever has. So, the order of words, your syntax, whatever it is, like, you, at the end of your 3 hours, is there an emotional exhaustion? Is there some sort of fatigue? Like, I just can't see, or have you sort of built up a callus to this work? But
Maybe
to me,
no. I like the idea of the callus. I was just thinking it is. I guess in some sense you do, right? Like you do end up sort of not in the same way that some people might think, in terms of, like, I think horrible stories are still going to affect you when they're horrible stories. Like, it's I don't, the idea of the sort of jaded, hardened person who, another dead body doesn't bother me, I'll just report it today. I don't really know many people like that. I was gonna say anyone, but I probably have crossed some in my path. But you do end up having to compartmentalize. I remember very, very early on, when I was associate producing on All in a Day, and it had just been a bad show that day. Like, things had gone wrong, and things had gone off the rails. Guests, like, it just had not gone well. I think the host wasn't happy, the producer wasn't happy, and, like, I was walking the producer down. This is when CBC was still at the Chateau Laurier, and we were walking through the hall, and she said, tomorrow you get to turn around and do the whole thing all over again. And she said, and just think, like, all of the people in the city who weren't listening. I was like, and I mean, she was making a joke, but it dawned on me, like, like with anything, you are, of course, as you should be, thinking about the people who are, but it was that weird moment of realizing, like, there is also an entire world that you have to navigate that is not part of your job. I gotta get kids to bed. I gotta get things, like, all this other realm of your life that, you have to remember about as well. Not just your life, like, not just like, oh, I need a spa day. I mean, like, you need to actually be aware of everything else that could matter. And so, like, you do in good and bad ways. You have to, not in good and bad ways, in both positive and sometimes negative ways, you have to just kind of let today go. You're also not going to sit there and all evening be percolating on what a fantastic job you did. Otherwise, that's not that healthy either. So you do, in a way, kind of put it aside and say, okay, and next, like, moving on. And that's why, like, I mean, that's why it's very kind to hear you say all these nice things, but, like, we don't spend a lot of time often thinking about, like, oh, are we good at this? Like, it's sort of, it is, you don't have a lot of time, really. You don't have a lot of time to consider and think things through in terms of successes and failures. You've got to, you sort of remember the failures and try and do better is more or less the thing.
Traveling like I do in Canada and flipping on the CBC in different parts of the country, the CBC sometimes has a different textural brand, or there's a different sort of general intellectual sensibility. There's the CBC from different cities it's not all the same. And there's a sense I get when I'm in the Ottawa building, and B, listening to you or other shows whenever I'm passing through that general area in the CBC, and then I start to hear the broadcast from Ottawa. Being in Ottawa, the nation's capital, the center of news, is there a vibe to the CBC there that is palpably different than what's happening outside of the Ottawa news-making machine? Are you cognizant of any of that?
Because I've
That's your home
really only
environment.
worked here.
Yeah.
Like it would be hard for me to judge. I know that certainly when other people have come from other locations to work in Ottawa, the the thing that they've commented on, which I always thought was really interesting, was like, wow, you guys are really kind of like a family here. Like there's a lot more of like it's not a particularly cutthroat environment. Like it's or I'm oblivious to all my enemies, but the like idea being that people are not competing quite as maybe in different markets or that kind of thing, but because Ottawa, I think there was a point certainly when so much attention was like public servants and parliament and city hall, and that was kind of it. And I think there's been a much grander understanding of Ottawa as being so multifaceted and so many different jobs and cultures and ideas and interests going on, that people, I think that has widened a lot. And but I think that I'm not sure that the news sense is that different. I think maybe the culture in the building is a little different, but that's purely, I'm purely basing that on what people have said when they've come to work here.
I'm just asking sort of the CBC nerd type questions about how the sausage gets made, because I mean, from the what is public facing for the CBC, we're all very well acquainted with. And for somebody like me who gets to be in the building from time to time in Toronto and from time to time in Ottawa or Vancouver, it's interesting to me how these things get made. So how many years has it been for you at the CBC? I couldn't come up with a number specifically.
Yeah. It's a very weird thing because I think, and like gives you a sense of how my brain works, that I don't actually know these things, but like I think I started in '98, if I'm not mistaken, like doing the casual thing.
Mm.
No, wait, that can't be right. Anyway, I know that I was like I think 8 years doing the casual thing, and then the Ontario Today came up, and I think that was 2004. So we can figure out the math from that, and then that was the first real job. But between that, like before the gig came up with like benefits and everything. There was, doing trends column and
Yeah.
pop cultural things and all those sorts of pieces that were happening in between. And a lot of it was, again, I treasure the fact that I was given the space to make stuff, like just to find a path and to create, and like the idea of just being able to say, hey, I've got an idea for a column, could we do this, or and equal parts somebody saying, hey, here's an opportunity. Like I've always said to people afterwards, if you want to do, and this isn't just for working at CBC, but you got to really be open to accepting an opportunity when it comes your way, when somebody is not everything. Like obviously the moral of the story, kids, is not say yes to everything, but to like be open and really think about everything, as opposed to sort of shutting things off and say, well, that's not the path I'm on right now. But also to make your own luck or make your own path, because if there's stuff that you want to do and you're waiting on the sideline for the sort of gold invitation to come in the mail, chances are it won't. It doesn't mean that when you're trying to make that path that everyone's going to open the door and say, absolutely, what, we were just waiting for you. Like that's not going to happen either. There's probably going to be a ton of people that say, no, please move along now. They did. But eventually a combination of accepting when somebody says, hey, and being willing to, make those opportunities for yourself, you do end up being able to do what you want to do. And sometimes, you have to do the stuff that you don't want to do as well. But like sometimes it's weird, dumb luck. My first Ontario Today experience was I had wandered down. I was walking down the hallway of that studio at the Chateau Laurier, and I went in to say hello to an engineer they were about to go to air. I was just saying hi to him, and he looked absolutely panicked, and he said, "Oh my gosh, Ontario Today is broadcasting from the Royal Winter Fair in Toronto. A Christmas tree has fallen down. It's disconnected their connection. We can't reconnect to them. We're about to go live. It's like noon, like 11:54 or whatever it was." And the producer's on the phone. She says, "Is that Alan? Tell him to go in and fill." And I was like, "What?" No, and I kind of thought it was a joke. Like I kind of thought it was, "Oh yeah, all right, I'm going to go live on radio." And so I went in and I sat down and like literally put on the headphones, and they're like, "Just try and fill. We're hoping to have the connection." And the theme is like fading up. And I was like, what? You're listening to Ontario Today. I'm Alan Neal. Dave Stevens isn't here right now. And so then I started to fill, and like it was ludicrous. And what was and I still remember the moment where I was like, coming up though, and the engineer, she was obviously feeding stuff to the engineer, and the engineer's trying to talk to me. So he's like, "Peat moss." I'm like, is Peat moss a person? Are they going to be talking about peat moss, like the substance in the gardening? What are we talking about? So I was like, and peat moss. And somebody was like running down the hall. And afterwards though, the producer was like it was terrible, and probably only lasted like 3 minutes. And what I felt was like I was filling an hour. But the producer said afterwards, she's like, "Well, if you can do that, you can probably, like, why don't you come in and be a fill-in host at some point?" And I was never thinking that was going to be. But again, like if I had just run from the room and said, no, that opportunity might not have developed into something down the road. Maybe it would have been just as good, and maybe it would have been like awesome to never have been hosting. But those weird moments, like you got to kind of accept and roll with and find out what happens sometimes.
It's very fascinating. So I guess that was an incredibly circuitous way for you to not tell me exactly how many years you've been at CBC, but
that was what the question was. Oh, no. Yes,
no, but I love it.
You see what it's like when people don't answer your question.
I love a good long yak and not answering the question, Alan. I know exactly what you're doing.
No, I've never had that Huxley Workman experience.
I guess because I'm working my way to a slightly less comfortable, the slightly less comfortable topic of how has making radio at the CBC changed over a couple of decades? Like, we are all aware that there's been cuts, and as passionate daily listeners, we've heard the radio change over the years. Some things have changed for the better. Some have changed in ways that, maybe I'm not listening like I used to. Maybe it doesn't speak quite to me. But I know that you're up against a lot behind the scenes. Are you able to speak to that at all, about what making radio 10 to 20 years ago looked like, and then making radio in the face of fairly severe budget cuts and a general, what I would say is a new sort of weighted focus on, do we value the CBC today in the same way we used to, and what is the CBC to us going forward? Are you thinking that? Can you speak to any of that? What has changed in the last 20 years of making radio for you?
Yeah, I mean, like the shorter, more boring answer is like, we don't know yet what budget cuts are going to affect. Like, you're already seeing people lost, across the country. There are people who I know who who I have definitely valued, and I was surprised by some of those choices. Locally, I don't know. Like, there has not been a big announcement about anything happening in Ottawa, but the changes in terms of you are always expected to do more with less, and it's kind of a cliche thing, but you are constantly in a position where when I first came to All in a Day, there was a it was a 2 hour show instead of a 3 hour show. You did one item every half hour, like pretty much like with on maybe a bit of tape. You had a producer, two associate producers, a production assistant, a person, a traffic person, the host, a writer broadcaster, like for a 2 hour show. Now, for a 3 hour show, there is a producer, a host, and two associate producers, and then people who are shared with like a million other jobs. Like they're working for other shows at the same time. That's like, and that is still, I think, if you went across the country, that is one of the larger staffs like on a show. And so there are some places, if you talk to the host of Thunder Bay, or if you talk to the host, in some places where it's a host slash producer like doing it all. So the resources that you have are always shrinking. And that is it is a pressure, of course. Like everybody can only do so much during a day. You run out of time, and the thing is that I find you tend to attract people who want to do their best no matter what, and so they find ways of doing it, and sometimes that is they take on more, and the what's the word I'm looking for, the work-life balance sways off the other way. And all this to say, like, there are jobs where people are doing like, I am never going to say, oh my gosh, I had the most challenging job in Canada today. I had to go in and talk to people all day, and it was just horrendous. Like, no, this is an awesome gig. Like, nobody will ever tell me otherwise. It still doesn't mean that when you are trying to do it well, everybody doesn't feel that crunch. Like, it's that's where it becomes, I think, harder and harder to do over time. And that's where you see, I think, just mental, and I don't, there's no study that's been done, but I would assume that when people are worked harder, that they probably stay in jobs shorter periods of time. Like, I would guess that they want to move on sooner. So I think that has an effect too. Like, I think that sort of thing plays a role. Like, I think it's kind of amazing sometimes what is threaded together, like what is able to happen. But certainly the kinds of constraints are different. I think, though, I mean, to be honest, I'm sure if you went back in a time travel machine and talked to somebody in 1992 CBC, they would talk about, well, in fact, right around the time there were cuts, but I think somewhere in the 90s there were the cuts. But like, you were always going to find people who were talking about less, like that they felt under the gun, that they felt like there was a lot going on. So I think all of that, probably everybody has felt it through every period in time. But I would say that's one of the bigger shifts.
I remember sort of minting or solidifying or making official my devotion to the CBC, driving in my mom's car, I think I was 17 or 18, to Toronto, and hearing Sheila Rogers do a show on fiddle music and they had a fiddler from each sort of fiddle region across Canada, and it was all done in real time, and they were trading fiddle stories and playing together in real time. And, wanting to sort of highlight the romance and nostalgia of my country at that age, like, I really felt like, wow, like, what's happening right now, what I am privy to in this moment in this car, I'm having such an extraordinary collective experience. And this is, I guess, what I'm driving at quite, is that for me, the CBC and arts and culture in general thrive when they have a collective experience element. Your show is a live show, so you don't get much choice in the matter. You are creating a collective experience every day in what you do. I think as a longtime listener, I'm hearing some of, let's say, CBC's pre-recorded shows moving in spaces to fill a podcast solution and less maybe a collective listening solution for I mean, even I remember as I had sort of my first job in Toronto in and around when Seinfeld was really becoming huge. And I could tell my coworkers started to talk like Seinfeld. Like I could feel like this TV show is changing everybody in this room. And that's exciting to me. I mean, it's also a bit, it's interesting and possibly terrifying. But the collective experience aspect to arts and culture in general to me is important. And I'm guessing for you, as someone who's coming with an ethos coming from theater, you're translating your theater chops into your live performance chops, your 3-hour show. You are creating a collective experience. Is there a behind the scenes mandate to move some of the CBC into to podcastify the instinct of CBC to make it less an opportunity for us all to listen together and more an opportunity for us to listen a la carte when we get the moment to?
I mean, not that memo hasn't gone out, but
Okay.
but like, yeah, no, I don't think, I do think there's totally something accurate in what you're saying. Like the way people listen is not the same. Like you are not, and watch and everything like that. Like I miss the idea of everybody sitting down to watch episode X and then talk
Me
about it
too.
the next day. Like
100%.
the idea that you're like, don't tell me this because I'm only at this part of a series. It's like drives me bonkers. Um, I may not have the best perspective on this because it is a daily show. So you are, yes, we're putting stuff up online, but it's not like you're not modifying it for the online listening experience. You're still, your main thing is always the
Yeah.
people who are listening in the moment. And I do think, I mean, that it is a different, you do certainly get a lot of feedback from people who are not listening in the moment, who are listening
Hmm.
to those sections later.
Yeah.
And I think there's of course, in the grand picture, the fact that somebody, wherever they are in the world, can hear it, and the fact that you could listen to something not when, like, it, what's the word I'm, broadcasting and programming should not be focused around the workday of a middle class person who, like, the same person who works the night shift should get to
Sure.
hear the
100%.
show
Yep.
whenever. The
Yep.
person who is staying up with kids all day or night should get to hear the shows when they want to listen to. Like, all of that is absolutely, like, I don't question that in a bit. But it is harder to have the collective. Well, is it? As I'm saying this, I'm just thinking, like, does the collective idea just change? Like, is the fact that you're not all talking about it at exactly the same time change the fact that, or change the role of somebody who's curating those experiences? The idea that you're hearing about it later and engaging with people at a different time is not the same. Like, I mean, the phone-ins, of course, they're still there, like, in Ontario today, and it's still one of the most thrilling things to be hearing all those voices
Yeah.
come in and do it. And I that was a fantastic period of my work. Like, I really enjoyed the phone-ins, but that's a different thing again from even like the period when I still really liked Twitter, where you would, I did, because that was the kind of social media that me personally, I'm not talking about CBC, I'm talking about me,
Yeah.
Alan Neal. I could handle Twitter because it was short and it did not require me to be, I updated when I wanted to. And I liked the sort of group conversation that would end up following. I loved following you on Twitter. Like there were people where it was just entertaining and fun,
Mm.
and people would whether and it would remind it had that experience of somebody could tap into their past or present or have an idea or bounce it around. And yes, it got, people were jerks sometimes, and like that occurred as well. But for the most part, it was, I found there was that sort of community occurring, very different from hearing voices, of course, but that collective experience. And I say this as somebody who's not on Instagram and so on, so I have nothing to compare it to. I just know that the conversations themselves on Twitter stopped being as fun.
Yeah.
And so I don't, so bring it back to radio again. Like, I think those collective experiences are still happening, but I just haven't, I think everybody has to make an adjustment as to what that means now.
Yeah. Well, you're positive about all that stuff, and maybe I'm digging to see if there's some grump hiding just below the surface there that I can get
Always.
on with. Yeah,
always. Okay. There's.
Well, can we quickly talk? I'm not going to keep you too much longer, but can we quickly talk about Ed Lawrence? I mean,
I know the crush that is involved.
I had a crush for years on Ed Lawrence.
Yes.
It's important to also remember that the Ed Lawrence years that I recall are, in many ways, this was before the internet became the sensation that it has become, and that the idea of listening to somebody who could be fluent with information in the way that he was seemed utterly impossible. It was like listening to the Botanical Kreskin or something, like.
Well, and for anybody who doesn't know who we're talking about, so
Yes.
Ed was like the gardening god of CBC phone-ins, and so he on Ontario Today, and what started, I believe, if I'm remembering right, it was Radio Noon. He was the Ottawa person that when Ontario Today went provincial, he was also like the hugest hit across the province. Like, it was the hour that you couldn't keep people away. And he had done work for all kinds of different organizations, but being in the studio with him, and like I like listening to the radio, there would be times where as in high school and university, I'd be like, what are people doing? But yet I would end up kind of being mesmerized at the same time with the people going, I've got earwigs, I've got aphids, what do I do? And then he would just always know the answer. And in the back of my mind, I always kind of thought, okay, he's got some giant book that he's like flipping through to find it. And so it was only, talking about how the sausage gets made, like it was only being in the studio with him. Ed had no book, no resources, was not ever, he wouldn't have been a looking up on his phone kind of guy, but he just would sit there and listen and say, well, that's very interesting, Janelle from Sault Ste. Marie. I think what you've got there is a tool. Like, he would know, and he would always, like, you could watch his mind kind of like clickety-clicking through the possibilities for an answer, and then it was like Poirot, right? Like, he would do, are you sure it's not this? Are you sure it's not this? Well, then it's this. Yeah. And like, so often people would be, I wouldn't say often they would argue, but sometimes they'd be like, I can't think that's it. And then we'd get the call next week. You don't have to put me on. Just tell him he was right. Like, it was always this thing where I'd be like, yep, yeah, he's right. And I still remember there was one woman where he was arguing, and Ed was so gentle and wonderful, like he would never actually argue with anyone, but where he was like, you'll never believe what happens. In the middle of my roses, this, what looks like a tomato plant is coming up. And he's like, well, it's probably a tomato plant. And she was like, no, the tomato plant's all the way on the other side of the garden. This, where like I've got roses, and then this tomato plant is coming out. I was like, yeah, I think probably one of the plants has ended up in the middle. It happens sometimes. It's maybe no. This is like, and he would just be so patient about like guiding people through, and not just in that way, but like just a gardening genius. Like he really would always seem to know the answers. And finally, I would say that the key to like where it's not just an on air persona or something. When we we had wanted for my wedding, um, we had this idea. Oh, it'd be cool to have like pussy willows at the table. Like instead of dealing with all these flowers, I wonder if there's some place we could just get pussy willows. And Ed was like, well, you've chosen completely out of season time for pussy. This is February, or you're not going to find them. And he's like, and then he was like, but I might have someone. And like that was where this ominous like phone call ended. And I was like, oh, okay. He showed up at my house with like bushels of pussy willows, and the thing was the buds were all closed. So he's like, now we're going to need a space to start shucking. I'm like, shucking? What are you talking about? And so like we were like pulling the little seeds off of, and then we had to make vats of sugar water to put them in to allow them to like, would I have known even remotely? But that was a great example of like where the person like really was who you heard on air. I mean, he had a wicked sense of humor that he didn't always share on air, but in terms of just being a wonderful guy and generous and thoughtful, like he was that. And none of that. I was thinking about this with the Apple TV show, the morning show, the Jennifer Aniston, Reese Witherspoon show the other day, where I was watching it, and so much of what they do is completely fabricated, right? Like you think they're having a genuine banter conversation, and it turns out it's all in the teleprompter. And it's really funny because I was sitting there thinking like TV is a very different world from what I do. But it made me think like, oh my gosh, is this what people think happens? Like, do they think that everything that I've taken a guest and like made up what they're going to say? Like when I've surprised Hawksley with this clip from his past, they think like on the show, nothing is actually surprises. Everything has been manipulated and worked out ahead of time. And I realized afterwards, I was like, oh my gosh, I wonder how many people think like, this is all made up. Nothing's a surprise. Nothing's genuine or like non-calculated. And so if anybody out there was ever like doubting about Ed Lawrence, this is one reputation I must defend. Like he absolutely, that was all real all the time. All real all the time. Yeah.
Well, speaking of generous, you've been generous, Alan. And thanks for dipping into a little bit of nostalgic fun for me with the Ed Lawrence thing. I mean, my mom had a hair salon in our house, and there was retired CBC people who were, I believe, like a camera operator or producer and a makeup artist who had retired on the lake I grew up on. And they both got their hair cut at my mom's house. And you'd hear them talking about the CBC in the 60s and how she would do, Glenn Gould's makeup. And even just from a distance, like there was, in some ways, there was a version of the CBC that it seemed like if you were some sort of savant, brilliant kook, you ended up at the CBC talking to us. Like how else would I have come across such a phenomenal creature as, well, you or Ed Lawrence for that matter? It felt like the CBC was the natural endpoint for the most interesting people in the country to be heard by the rest of everybody else. And I guess I still sort of hold a candle for this vision of the CBC. And I feel like you're operating within the context of your work in the capacity of that rich CBC experience that I fall in love with. And your voice is still that voice. I still feel like you're out, and I know how hard it is to stay wanting to do good, to be good at your job 2 decades in. That's not easy. Restaurants have a hard time lasting that long. Artists have a hard time lasting that long. I'm sure radio presenters do too. I mean, it's really hard, I would think, after all those years to be chasing it with the passion, excitement, and awareness that you are, to be wanting to produce a great show every time. So thank you for that. And then finally, what is left for Alan Neal? I was working on a theater piece this weekend with a couple of people that I've known well for a long time. And those couple of people in separate conversational instances brought up the R word of retirement. Now, I'm 49. I think you're what, 51? Is
Yeah,
this a
I'm
word
not 51 yet. I'm still in the 50 year.
Okay, I'm about 50. I'm at 49 soon. I'm not 49 yet. But is this a word you're thinking about? Is there another, is there an act that's yet to be played out for you? Is there something we can expect? Like, are you going to play out your years at the CBC as a beloved host? What's coming for you?
Well, let's not tack the word beloved on just yet. As a host, perhaps. But the
You are beloved. Come on.
but host, it's there's I have no idea. Like, I mean, honestly, like, I wish I had life planned out. Um, I mean, it's not always going to be a Christmas tree falling over, but you don't really know what's around the corner at any point. I don't have immediate plans to retire or depart, but there is. I mean, you do at some point have to say, okay, what does one do next down the line? And I mean, I've noticed that a lot of your conversations on the Stumble Forward do seem to be about that idea of what do we do at our age? Like, what
Yeah.
by the way, the Sam Roberts conversation is totally fascinating between the two of you. But that idea of what you are able to plan and what you're able to make yourself available to, I think depends very much on time that you have to be open to things too, right? Like, and I haven't done a lot of that. I haven't sat down and said, okay, what all might be around the corner? What could be next on the path? But as I say, like, you never shut doors out completely, but also you don't. I'm not leaping immediately. Let me put it that way.
Well, Alan, it's funny because in this theater workshop I was at on the weekend, there was a lot of talk. We were discussing people that we all knew very well and people who had great success, and discussing how some of those people had received what we would call in hockey parlance an assist on their success. And you've sort of outlined in some ways, like, by having your stick on the ice, like the Christmas tree drops on the phone line, and that's your assist, like, for you to shoot your first goal. Like, you were there and ready and primed, and that opportunity came, and you seized that opportunity. Those are the moments that anybody who's working their way into the arts and culture biz, which isn't a biz that rolls out a red carpet for anybody. You have to work your way in. You have to elbow your way in to some degree. You have to do a lot of free work. There's a lot of cajoling. And then when that assist comes, when that puck is sliding in your general direction and somebody's saying, put the headphones on, get in front of the mic, start filling. It's like, can this kid do this or not? And voila, he can do it. So you took the assist and turned it into the goal that's created this opportunity. So you're someone who's keenly aware, by virtue of how your career has unfolded, that having your stick down, having that peripheral vision sharp, and staying agile and staying in the game in a way that is passionate and eyes open. How else would you want to live? Honestly, like, I can't see Alan Neal as somebody who would just fade away into the easy chair, really.
Yeah,
I just
depends how
not
comfortable
that's
it is. I
who
mean,
you are.
that's a pretty. That sounds good. Fading into the easy chair suddenly sounds fantastic. But have you seen these chairs? They're not good. But no, I think, like, I also I don't. My dad just turned 90 on Monday, and, like, I think I've also been surrounded by people who are so vibrant, as a, not, every health is one thing, but, like, in terms of doing things and wanting to continue to do things, that um who you are, I hope, is never completely identified as your work, but it also is a piece of you. Like, it's I obviously, as a dad and a husband and all those other things, those are huge pieces of who you are, but one also does need to be doing something for you as well. And so I hope to always be able to be doing the stuff, something that's going to be creative, that's going to bring joy, that's going to help in some way. And so right now this is doing that, and when it's not, it won't be anymore. But there's still my Hawksley Workman tribute band, my
It's gonna be good.
yeah, it's gonna be awesome. I gotta learn I've got my song for Sarah Jane. I'm going to play it just here.
Alan Neal, thanks for this. I really
Thank you.
appreciate
This is thank you so much for taking the time.
It's my pleasure. It's
adding
great
me.
to chat.
I hope people will be able to tell me apart from Sam Roberts when they're watching this. They'll be able to say, "Oh, that is not Sam Roberts. That's we look so much alike."
Let's do a quick extra piece then, because this we don't need to use, but we'll call that this show is over. But if this works, then I can shoot this as added piece to my Patreon people. But I feel like what you're talking about with the Sam Roberts thing is how extraordinarily handsome he is. Is that what you're talking about? You're handsome too. You need to know that.
Thank you.
But you and I both lost our hair. Let's talk about that for a second.
You're asking us to just do a reveal? Is that what we're doing?
No, we don't need a reveal because you and I have. Well, you've been photographed, I think, more with your follicular situation than I have. But there's photos out there of me. Was it devastating for you?
I think one of the differences possibly between you and me is that you.
I branded myself on my hair on those first two records, and then now what the hell do I do?
Well, no, but a lot was made of your look, right? Like a lot was made of, and there's a lot of photos of you doing.
No way! That's so
for people who are doing or just listening to the audio version of this, I'm posing a lot. There's a lot of lips being pursed and like shirt kind of like off the corner.
It's Madonna's Vogue coat.
Being like looking wet all the time. And
oh my Lord, it's so sad but true.
And so with me, like I mean, this is not like me, beating myself up, but I've never been thought of as like, oh, that's hot. Like that's not so hair though was something that I liked about myself. Like I did like the big curly massive hair that I had. And so it is weird seeing that, vanish over time. But at the same time, I think also I was just like, something else. Like I don't know. It's I feel like if I had built more on my look, maybe that would be a bit harder. But would I, if somebody had a magic power with no like surgery or ability to make it, would I take it back in a second? Yes, I would. Yes, I would. But it's not. Yeah.
It's a hairline for radio, I guess.
It's a hairline for radio. Exactly. That's the name of my band.
Hairline for radio. All right. It's a silly little additional bit, but it's a funny thing personally, I finally got comfortable with it. It took a couple decades though of like, this is never coming back. And even like when I say comfort, it's not 100% comfort still. I still maintain, like you said, if there was something that I could snap my fingers and have hair, I would do that in a heartbeat. Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It's you've adjusted well though, Huxley. Like it's still a good look. It's still a good look. Don't worry.
Thank God for this. Watching you do those Vogue poses, I don't know. I'm gonna be thinking about that for some days. Like, oh Lord.
There is an interview we once did where I can't remember whether it was which album it is where there's this inside picture of you and you're like in a shirt in the like you're wet again and like you're
wet
like,
again. Sure.
You're and you were in the middle of talking to me about like not feeling like you understood like you're not always the most attractive person. I was like, if you think you're not the most attractive person, why are you posing?
Are you doing this? Yeah.
This picture, and you just started laughing like in the middle of the interview. You're like, okay. But yeah, it's
incredible. All right, Alan, man, you got right down. See, there it is. That's the thing. Is like you want to get to the pith. You're like a truffle dog for pith. There, you find the pith of the story. You just go right to it, bite it. I feel it now. I'm gonna have to go lick a wound or two here.
I say with love. I say with love.
All right, Alan Neal, bless you. Thanks for this interview. I'm very grateful for it indeed. All the best going forward and continued success in your radio job and being the voice of the drive home for Ottawa residents and and beyond. And thanks again for this.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the music, and thanks for always answering my questions. I'm going to have to really research for the next time. It's going to be good.
Bye.
Bye.
The Stumble Forward is an Isadora Media production and is hosted by Hawksley Workman and produced by Jennifer Kavanaugh. Be sure to subscribe and follow The Stumble Forward. You can support the podcast at patreon.com/Hawksley Workman. Thank you for listening.
Stumble forward, the stumble.